Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leading Ladies Showcase. I'm your host, Diane Essery, and this is episode 4, An Imperfect Leader's Journey to be Intentional. And my guest tonight is Melissa Carson. The Leading Ladies Showcase is a place where we can come together and we can talk shop with women who are out leading and influencing in the world about their journeys of leadership, the wisdom that they've gained, their thoughts around up-leveling their career or reimagining it as they're in pursuit of what's purposeful and passionate and fulfilling for them in their lives. So I'm so excited to have you here, Melissa.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Melissa has over 25 years of global HR leadership in large organizations, and now she's focusing her expertise to provide strategic talent and people support and solutions to fast-growing small and mid-sized organizations. She partners with individual leaders and helps them understand their, what she calls imperfection gremlins, which I'm intrigued to dive into, so they can be more strategic and they can, set a direction for themselves and their teams, be more intentional in their approaches. Melissa is also, she's a powerhouse. Melissa is also the author of 2 books, A Perfect Life is Not the Goal, which is a practical guide to loving the life you are living, and another book called There's No Such Thing as a Perfect Job, a practical guide to loving your work life. And I am just so excited to have you here, Melissa. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, it's really funny. I have sort of like a structure that I follow with these episodes, and I meet women. I mean, we all meet women, I think, everywhere we go, and women who are in business, in leadership, women who are, just in the working world or trying to make an impact out in the world. And you and I came together at the Women's Leadership Conference this past November. And I was just intrigued by, the work that you're doing, and we bumped into each other a couple times and at other things. So through our Chamber of Commerce, which is extremely supportive, I feel in our state, which is in Delaware, and that was just. It was every year that I go to that. It's just always so amazing to see what women are out there doing and how they're changing things. And so as I was thinking about who was going to come on for my next episode, I wanted to work you into the lineup here, and so I'm so glad that you came. And I wanted you to just kind of speak tell us a little bit about your journey as a leader and as an influencer. It's brought you to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, I've had an interesting journey. I ended up kind of by happenstance in the HR field. That was not the plan that I had, going through it, but I landed in HR in leadership roles pretty quickly. And it was a little bit of trial by fire of, figuring out what did that mean. And I had the opportunity working at a large organization like Accenture to change jobs whenever, every year or two. I became a little bit, and I don't say this in a negative way, but I'll use the terms because people will understand, like little ADD with I would go do something and be like, okay, that's been a year and a half. I'm ready to do the next thing. Let's go try something else. And so I was able to really experience a lot of different personalities of leaders that I had the opportunity to work with, and different activities that I got the chance to do. And so, also decided to take a career leap of faith. just over 19 years into my Accenture career to go figure out what was next, because I wasn't sure where I was going, and that I didn't think it was my end game. And I figured if I didn't leave, then I would maybe never leave. So left and went on a journey to figure out, do I go start my own business, or do I go back into an organization? And spent a little time looking into both options and decided that I wasn't ready to have my own business, because I wasn't sure actually I could do it and build a business. And I still wanted to be part of something. So spent a couple more years in corporate, and then decided I didn't want regrets, and saw lots of people that were successful having made a transition from, a corporate HR career into coaching and consulting, and said, why not me? So, took a leap of faith again, and launched in October 2019, which was an interesting time.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. So, yeah. And I know that you have been all over that field of working with women in various leadership roles. So you have seen the trends change. I mean, almost 2 decades, things are really different.
Mhm.
And in some ways, things are a little bit still the same. But I always want to hear from the women in leadership that I meet, what they think about what is one of the most difficult things about being a leader.
I mean, I think there are just a lot of things about it's just challenging to hold all of it together. From a perspective, I think a leader has to have a vision. They have to have a plan of where they're trying to go. They have to find ways to get the best from their teams. They have to, meet the needs of their clients and their customers and their stakeholders and their people. Like, there's a lot of demand on a person who's playing a leadership role. And I think more and more over the past, decade or so, we've really realized that you really can't have a one-size-fits-all strategy to lead it. If you want to get the best. We've seen it work. I mean, people do it and they get results, but they're not winning, like, as they say, hearts and minds. By having, this is the way I talk to you, this is the way I motivate you. Everybody's the same, and I treat everybody the same. And so I think finding that balance of how do I learn enough about you and how to motivate, how to keep you motivated and engaged, versus say, Carol, in this example, like, you all may have different stories and different priorities and different motivations. And I think figuring that out of how do you harness that, knowing that if you have a team, it's not just one person you're trying to figure out, it's a team. And how does that team best work together to get optimal performance? And so I think that's kind of what it makes it hard. It's not just a cookie cutter answer.
Yeah, being able to move forward with that vision that you have, and sort of not be cookie cutter, help recognize individuals for all of their contributions, yet gather everybody together at the same time with your message, with your strategy.
And I think for women, in some ways, it's harder because of the expectations either that are put upon us or that we put on ourselves.
Talk more about that.
So I think that, from the expectations we put on ourselves, we look at everybody else and we say, hey, they're juggling it all, I should be able to do it. Or all of this seems to be working, that we play a little bit of the comparison game, to say, I've been taught I can have it all. I've been taught that I can be whatever I want to be, which is I believe, but there's a lot of juggling that comes. And so you say, here's my expectations of what I should be able to do based on what I see and what I perceive, but also an organization. Sometimes the bar is different for men and women, even in progressive organizations that are trying to level the playing field. There are just some different expectations of what, women are assumed that they will do, whether it's the special employee resource groups that they would participate in that. If it's helping to plan an event, if it's helping to take meeting notes, not in a condescending way, but there's just an assumption that, or an obligation that women feel that we're going to raise our hand because we don't see somebody else doing it. We're like, oh, I'll do that. So sometimes it's just an extra burden that often lands on people.
What's the sacrifice that women in leadership are making that you believe they don't need to make? Or
I think they struggle with boundaries around, how do I say no, or when do I say no to a deadline? When do I say no to and not feel guilty about it? I remember a business trip that wasn't mission critical that I needed to take, but it was an important one that I wanted to go on. And I had a sick child. And I felt so guilty. Like I almost decided to go. And then I was like, it's not the right thing. Like they don't absolutely need me. And this was, pre-Zoom days or whatever, but still could have video conference and they would be fine. But I think we put a level of guilt of, making it work. And so I think what we sacrifice is a little bit of our sanity, a little bit of our well-being, because we're trying to say yes to everything. And we forget that when we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. And often that is sleep, taking care of ourselves, exercise, eating well, being with our family and our friends, and just our hobbies. Like tends to be what we often give up.
Yeah.
And I think COVID and the pandemic was a bit of a wake-up call for many people, because all of a sudden they realized, I don't want to give this up. Like I'm spending, because I'm not commuting, or because the dynamics have changed at work for many people. Obviously, if you're more of an office related, have an office related job versus a frontline employee. But people said, I love having dinner with my family. I love going on walks with my kids or taking my dog for a walk, and realize, oh, this is what it feels like when I feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, I love that. That's so true. Yeah. And you are really, you have been out there and seeing how COVID has changed the whole complexion of working life. For those folks who do have hybrid options, and allows them to see things, what they could be giving up, what they could be hanging on to, and saying yes more to that without sacrificing any job security or any expectations to meet their goals at work.
I think we're also seeing a trend in environments where it is more of a frontline worker, like you actually have to physically be there, that to find what kind of flexibility can we allow. It may not be where you work, because we need you to physically be, at a restaurant, or we need you physically to be in a hospital or a doctor's office, or, as a bank teller, et cetera. But so it can't be the where, but it might be, when do you work? Can you do more alternative shifts? Maybe it's not the traditional, 8 to 5 type hours. And we've seen it for years with nurses who may have, a 3-day schedule and then be off for 4 days. But more and more, how do you accommodate flexibility in different types of job profiles? And I think that's seeing even more growth from progressive companies. I would say there's still quite a few that are hearkening back to, well, this is the way we did it and it worked, so we should go back. And I never believe we go back. We take what was good from the past, we add what is the now, and we look to the future.
Yeah. You and I talked about these imperfection gremlins, and I know you've been kind of talking a little bit here already into that, but expand on this concept that you came up with, and the coaching that you do around this, where it comes from, and what can be done to get the gremlin out.
Yeah, I think that, in a lot of, assessments and things, look at, our light and our dark side, et cetera. But when I started looking at trying to simplify it for just anybody to be able to look at for themselves. It was to identify what are the things that hold you back? Where do you get in your own way? And so, for me, one of my imperfection gremlins is as I'm a controller. I want to be able to know what's going on. I want to control the outcome. I want to take care of it. And so I'm always trying to control. And in some cases, when that's done well, that's great. Like, people see me as somebody who can get things done and, deliver, good quality on time, et cetera. So that it can be really good. But when I'm under stress, that doesn't show up very pretty. That shows up as impatience. It shows up as shortness in what I'm saying. It may be tone of voice. So when I'm super tired or I've had a bad day, those types of things, that profile shows up. And so I think being aware of what is that imperfection gremlin that is your thing, that is on your shoulder, that you're looking at, that you need to figure out, how do I calm that down? How do I tame it? So it, is doing the good things. So if you think about the perfectionist or the cookie cutter who wants just an approach, fairness is great, from a cookie cutter perspective, but are you getting the best? Are you always the hero, or is your hair always on fire, like in the heat of it all, running from one thing to another? So very simple, but just really trying to think about what shows up for people, and that gets in their way if they don't figure out how to tame it.
Yeah. I know I personally struggled with being able to set those boundaries, to feel empowered enough and, trust myself enough to say, I have a real problem with that deadline or taking on those additional responsibilities, and trying to not feel, like you said, guilty. And the only way to, feel better about it was to just say yes to doing it, which then my hair's on fire. Then everything is a crisis. And all people see is somebody running around like, because that's what their life is feeling like at work. And that's not sustainable. And that's where I really struggled, and found that I wasn't able to sustain that. But there's got to be a different way to approach work and, honoring what you are, the gifts that you're bringing and the talent that you're bringing, without going, feeling like you need to be Superwoman.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down a lot to being really clear on what your priorities are, because I think that's the challenge. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And many of the people that I work with, if you were to say, what are the three big rocks, that you really need to focus on, for success in your role? Sometimes it takes a while. There might be some obvious things like, oh, I need to hit my revenue target. I need to hit my profit, like those types of, leadership metrics. But at the end of the day, the priority is really around what's it going to take to get there, and so I need to do these things. And so stepping back, and really thinking about what are the priorities, and then does my calendar reflect that? Because a leader I worked with, relatively early in my career, she was really clear. Like, she told the story, like, you have your three rocks, and if your three rocks don't show up on your calendar in the right proportions of what you think their relative importance is, you're not going to be successful. And so then I take that, and then I think about the story of the jar of rocks, and where, if you have big rocks and small pebbles and sand and, those types of things, if you put all the sand and pebbles in first, which is a lot of what we end up doing. I want to check this off my list. It's the 5-minute thing. I've got it done. You put all that sand and pebbles in, then you can't fit the big rocks in. So it's really around what are those big things. And I say, try and limit it to 3. Put those in first, be really clear. And then the other things can come along. They'll fit in to the life you want to have. And that's really hard, because people, if I look at some of my clients' calendars, they are booked, 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night in meetings, no time to think, no time to plan, and a feeling that they have to be there. And
Right.
maybe culturally they need to be in those meetings, but sometimes we find, okay, well then where are you going to find the space? Because your job as a leader is not just to execute. Your job
Yeah.
as a leader is to think, to plan,
Yeah.
to identify what are the strategies, where are the trends. And if you're not giving yourself any time, even if it's Saturday morning over a cup of coffee, like that's great. If you've carved that out and that's your perfect time and it works, wonderful.
Right.
But you have to have it.
Yeah. I hear from so many people. It was my own experience as well. The meetings begin well before the workday begins. The emails are coming in the middle of the night from some members of the leadership. You're having meetings right through lunch. You can't even take care of basic needs like food and bathroom breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I had mentioned to you at one time, I remember a particular day, and I mean, I worked at the bedside as an RN for 5 years on a critical care floor. So I knew about having to just at a moment's notice do, what was required. And yet it still feels crazy to think one day I had 4 different meetings that I was in at the same time, like one on my, computer. This was before the advent of Zoom in, our corporation. One that was on the phone, so they were on mute, and everybody was getting put on mute, and then my personal phone, I had a call with somebody, and then I had somebody coming in my office with like a crisis. It just doesn't, it's not going to work.
We think we can multitask, but really we
We
can't.
do think that we can. Yeah,
We-
I did
we're
think
switching.
somehow it was Superwoman, and I was going to fix, what was in my, field of work to fix. But the problem was that the field just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, yeah.
And when we don't say no or push back on boundaries, then the assumption is that we can do more.
Right.
Because we haven't said, hey, I'm at that point, like, or I need, and so often, I mean, an easy fix for many people, when somebody gives them a deliverable, we tend to just say, oh, I'll jump on it. We often don't ask, when do you really need it? Because often we'll find it's not needed today or tomorrow. It's like next Friday, but we make it a priority. And so by letting other people's priorities take over ours, then we're not making the impact that we could make because we're shifting whose priorities are most important.
It's funny because I recall there were some individuals in where I had worked in different roles who were very good at saying, I'm sorry, no. And it was like, oh my God, like I want to be like that. I want to have that assertiveness. And it's definitely learned and practiced. But yeah, I feel like every one of us probably knows that person in their organization who can, and maybe it's some of our viewers themselves who can say that, but not as easy. It's just not as easy.
And particularly, culturally, some organizations, it's not going to be as easy. And sometimes you have to see somebody else do it first to be like, is it safe to do that? But I think as leaders and people watching us, if we're not modeling it, then we're continuing to create the behavior. Though I would say the people coming up earlier in their career right now, I don't know if they're going to, sort of go along with it. I think more and more what we're seeing is people want growth opportunities. They want to excel. They want, promotions and things like that, but they're not willing to do it in sacrifice of their personal well-being and their personal priorities.
Isn't that a novel idea?
Yeah.
Yeah. And are you referring to specifically the generation that's kind of hitting the workforce in their 20s?
Yeah, I'm thinking about them, but even some of what I'm reading, even people that are, in their 30s and 40s have looking at it and saying, you know what, I think somebody's coined it of just, I'm gonna work for what I'm paid. And
Mhm.
people are saying people are less motivated or less driven. And I'm not sure that that's the truth. It's more, I know what I want is this whole life, not
Yeah.
just work life.
Yeah.
But I think some of the younger generations have watched their parents and have
Mhm.
said, I'm not sure. I want growth and opportunity and in networking and all of those things. And I want a fast track, but I don't necessarily want to do it and give everything else up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And it's like really getting those free rocks in the jar, you know? If they're able to say that now, that's excellent. And that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you also is, what do you think is the future of women as leaders, in all leadership roles, whether it's in organizations or corporations or in business or wherever you would like to address that?
I mean, I think that I am optimistic that we will continue to see a closer percentage of men and women um, in leadership, so that we start to see those numbers come up. Because I do think they are, we know that when you have different profiles of people, there's different ways of leading. And I think, it is a generalization that women, tend to lean into their empathy a bit more or lean into their relationships a bit more. It's a generalization. But I do believe that if we see more women in leadership roles at all levels, then we will continue to see stronger organizations, more motivated people, if we can get that balance right. I think it will continue to be hard, and you're seeing, some senior leaders say, I'm out, because of the stress or because of the environments that they're in. But I hope that we will continue to see organizations say, okay, we don't want to lose those women, because we need them. We've seen, in many cases, people opting out, as they start having families.
Mhm.
And so I hope that we stop seeing that, because I hope that A, we do something about childcare. B, I hope that we see a better balance of, parents in the home balancing the workloads to
Right.
allow for women to choose if they want to stay,
Right.
and feel like it's a good option to stay on a fast track at work, rather than to say, you know what, I don't feel like it's a good answer because for my family. And so I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of things that have to shift for it to be easier for women to lead. But I think we're at a good time overall. So I'm optimistic.
You're here. That's good news. Because, the alternative is burnout. And, I love that this sort of intersection of where you and I are, preventing the burnout, and managing expectations, and managing what your desired outcome is the most in your work, in your relationships, and your health, just everything, because you're living a life, you're not living work. So yeah.
And it's all about choices and really what is most important to you. And there's not a right or wrong. If your career is the most important thing to you, that's
Sure.
great. And if you want to work 60, 70, 80 hours because you love doing it and you don't feel like you're giving up and you're not burning out, that's a great path.
Absolutely.
But on the flip side, if that's not the life that you want, that's also okay. But you have to make choices.
Yeah.
So going back to what I said about you can have it all. I think it depends on when you have it all and what having it all means, and what are the trade-offs of what you're willing to say, hey, this really isn't as big of a priority as I thought it was for right now, because we do go through chapters in our life. And so we may put something on pause. But I think the things we have to keep, honestly, is our well-being focus. Like if that's not a priority, then I think it will become one. It's sort of like, if you don't do the preventive
Yes,
care, at some
rise to the
point,
surface. Yeah.
it will show up.
Yeah. What is your, like, you've already touched on several of them, 2 to 3 pearls of wisdom that you'd like to leave our viewers with during this episode of the showcase?
I think the first one is, know what's most important to you. Like really, sit down and be clear and be honest with yourself of what's most important. And then I think the second piece to that is then be intentional around how do you make sure that, those are your priorities, that you are setting boundaries so that those can be honored. And then I think the third one is, if you're not having fun and loving what in some part, like it's time to rethink what's going on. And I'm not saying we all have, cycles of just family trauma or things like that, or just crises that happen and it's not a good time. But if we
overall, what's the trend?
But overall, like if you can't go through a week or a month and be like, I found joy, in something that I did, then it's time to step back and say, okay, well, how do I find that? Maybe I'm not looking. For those little things, whether it's as simple as a sunrise or a sunset or something. But hopefully, like I want more people to love what they do. And that it not just be a paycheck. And some people, that's all they need because they have a joy outside. They have a hobby, a passion, or something that fills them up. But if you're working, and that joy is not somewhere else, then I want more people to love it. And so I think finding a way to love what you do.
Would you say that that's the legacy that you'd like to leave?
Well, I think I tie it to two things. I would say sort of the themes of those two guides that I put together, perfect's not the goal.
Right.
That I would say is the overarching, like perfect is not the goal. And because there is no perfect, we're not perfect. We will never be perfect. And any situation will not be perfect. And so it's figuring out, how do I love what I have? And how do I create what I want? So that I can love the life that I live.
Yeah. Do you think that there is an expectation in the organizational landscape for a degree of perfection? That there are those in the old guard or even in the new guard who say, of course, you're human, but really they expect the perfection. Or you've heard the horror stories of a colleague and you're scared to death that you're going to drop the ball.
I think it's real. I mean, I think that you're seeing more vulnerability in the workforce of leaders than we've seen in the past of being able to, admit failures, but particularly with the lesson behind them. Like, here's what I did wrong. Here's what I learned from it. And so I think creating an environment where it's okay to say, this didn't go well. I think, these are businesses. They're trying to, in general, make money.
Exactly.
And so there's an assumption of, yes, you're going to do good quality work. But I think part of it is admitting, hey, it didn't go well. Like this, if you're thinking about an innovative, creative company, you have to try and fail before you find the right thing. Like, it's not going to always be the first idea that is the best one. But if you're doing something that is more defined, there's an expectation, or that you ask for help. Because that's the other thing that I don't see, as I think becomes a challenge, is people wait too long to say, hey, this isn't working.
Is it more prevalent in women than men, or just the opposite?
Well, I think it works both ways. I think maybe the mental space is maybe a little bit different. Of maybe men, I think do feel pressure that the expectation is of them that they don't ask for help.
Right.
I think for women, it's a worry that if I do ask for help, does that mean I'm weak? Are people going to think of me lesser? So a little bit similar, but just I think emotionally it comes out a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. And I think when, this is definitely something that I learned a long time ago in way back, is that you're going to attract what you need by coming with a solution. So yes, you need help. What can you tell your leadership that the solution will be? What can you tell your team that you need from them for the solution? Yeah. Good stuff. I wish I'd had you when I was, I love what I'm doing now, but had I, stayed with that, I would have really needed somebody like you.
I probably needed somebody like me. Like it definitely was not the leader that I always wanted to be. And so, I've had the opportunity to step back and look at, how I led, and some of it I'm proud of, and some of it, ooh,
Yeah.
that was not how I, really wanted to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, the title of our episode tonight is the journey of imperfection to intention. And it is something that you get wiser over the years as you go through it, because we're sort of taught theories of leadership, right? But we're not taught all of the messiness of it, and all of the ways to, the really deep interpersonal stuff, and I think a lot of organizations do try to provide that professional development for their leadership, and maybe to cultivate those who maybe will be rising into leadership. But it can be an elusive thing to get if you haven't. I don't think any industry really teaches.
I think we focus on skills. Like you need to have
We
effective communication. What does it mean to effectively communicate? What does it mean to, provide somebody with effective feedback? How do you deliver it? And so I think we, most organizations, that have sort of programs, do that for their people. I think what you said is the key. And this is why I feel like the leadership playbooks have to sort of just go out the window to a bit, because it is about all of the messy. And I talk about it as like, you have to harness the messy. You have messy, your team has messy. And how do you harness all of that? And I think the only way you figure that out is through, scenarios and conversations of, I do some work around, okay, let's talk about recognition. Your people want to be recognized. What does that mean to you? Like, what's your version of recognition and how you were brought up? And how is that impacting how you lead your team? Like, if you are embarrassed to be recognized, are you not recognizing them publicly because you wouldn't want it?
Exactly.
And so really thinking through what baggage am I carrying that might be impacting, and how do I think about it, and how do I customize my approach to my team members so that they get what they need?
Yeah. So this has just been wonderful having you on, and so many interesting shares that you have brought today. I'm just so grateful to have met you, Melissa, and that you've come on our show and shared this wealth of experience that you have, and as I said, the wisdom. What's next for you?
I am sort of continuing on this path around how do I help develop leaders, and how do I help organizations really have the right people strategy so that people thrive, that they get the best for them, and that people want to be there. So that's my passion, is, because the focus on leaders is because I know how important leaders are ultimately to an organization's ability to motivate, engage, and retain people. And so they're key.
Especially
and
right
now,
now,
how hard it
we
is.
have so many people who call it quits after 9 months of work and bounce to the next job. And they may not be in leadership, but that makes it extremely difficult for teams.
Mhm.
So, and for the, for the goals of the organization when they have so much turnover.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But it's been
So,
lovely being here.
yeah, I had a lot of fun. um, so one thing I wanted to do is ask you, we've heard so much about like, how you came up through the HR world and your journey as a leader and blending that in your life. But tell us one thing that is a little bit of personal trivia about you, that you would say maybe most folks don't know about you.
Mm. Well, I mean, one piece of trivia that people who follow me on social probably know, because I use it periodically in posts, but I'm a runner, but it took me a really long time to own that title of a runner because I'm not fast. And I didn't start running until I was in my early 40s, probably 42, 43. But now I have to sort of call myself a runner, admit that I'm a runner, because I've run 3 marathons and I've run 20 some half marathons and done triathlon. So like I have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
That even though I am not fast and I'm not going to win the races, that I go out there and I run, and I do it because I love the community of running with other people. I started doing races because I was looking for a way to be competitive besides work. So not necessarily to win, but could I get better? Could I run faster? Could I run farther than I did? And so that's been my focus. And what can I do? What will my body go along with?
You remember back in the 70s and 80s, I think we're both old enough, I think, to remember when it wasn't running, it was jogging.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think mine would be closer to called the jog. And
More of a
I,
jogger.
when I started my first marathon training, I fell into doing run walk intervals. And so I swear by those now. And I don't think I'm slower because of it. I think I'm in some ways faster
Yeah.
because of that short 30-second break.
Yeah. I love that. I tried to run the Dublin Marathon. I was training for it and then put my hip out running on trails. So I just went and watched, but that's such an achievement. Yes, you must call yourself a runner if you've done 20 half marathons and 3 marathons. My goodness, you are in runner's world.
But I'll say my one international race was I did the Dublin half.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, yeah. That's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Before we go, what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they would like to reach out?
I think the best way is LinkedIn, because I am very active there. I post regular content every day. I've started, a bi-weekly LinkedIn audio series around sort of people strategy topics. So I've got one coming up next Wednesday on culture. So that's probably the best way to find me. Okay.
And I will also, for folks, I will be dropping the links in the comments. This video will be, if you're watching on replay, you're watching it out on my YouTube channel. So that information will be there so that you can contact Melissa or go back into the event and you have all of her information and different ways to get a hold of her. But yes, you have an extremely strong presence in LinkedIn. I am inspired by that. Have a great evening. Thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the Leading Ladies Showcase, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.